A forklift is a powerful tool. Driving one is a lot like driving a car. And like a car, if it isn't used properly, it can be dangerous. Only forklift dangers aren't the same. You've probably seen this kind of forklift truck before, but this is only one of a dozen different kinds. Actually, though, forklifts can be divided into two groups, indoor-outdoor and indoor-only. This is an indoor-outdoor forklift. It has pneumatic tires similar to the tires on a car. These tires provide the truck with the clearance and cushioning it needs on uneven ground. And like the tires on a car, they can go flat too. Lift trucks like this are used only indoors and on smooth floors. They have either solid tires or foam-filled cushion tires. These are more resistant to damage from cuts and punctures. And because these tires are smaller, they allow the indoor-only truck to be moved around easily in cramped spaces. This indoor-only truck is powered by batteries. The kind of forklift we have here is an indoor-outdoor one and has an internal combustion engine. Some of these are powered with gasoline or diesel fuel. This one runs on liquid propane gas, which is also called LPG fuel. This kind of indoor-outdoor truck is called a counterbalanced high lift. What this means is that it's weighted in back to balance the truck against the weight of its load up front, counterbalanced. And it is called a high lift because it can lift a load higher than 10 inches above the ground. In addition to counterbalanced high lift trucks, there's another kind of high lift called the straddle type. It gets its name from the way it carries its load. The legs or outriggers straddle the pallet, while the forks between the legs lift it. Besides high lifts that can raise the load well above the ground, there are low lifts which are only used indoors and on smooth surfaces to move loads from place to place. Some low lifts are called walkies. An operator guides the low lift while walking along with it. You can think of a walkie as a sort of wagon. Others allow the operator to ride them. These are called riders or walkie riders and are usually found in large warehouses where greater distances are involved. Since there are so many kinds of forklift trucks, it's important for you to be completely familiar with the type or types you'll be operating. The operator's manual, which should be kept with the truck all the time, is where you can find the information you need to know. Before operating any lift truck for the first time, start by looking through your truck's manual. To safely operate a lift truck, you have to know how it works. This is the part that makes it a forklift, the elevating assembly. The forks which give the forklift its name are attached to the front of this carriage. They can be moved from side to side. The wider they can be set under a load, the more stable the load will be. The load back rest is also part of the carriage. It helps to stabilize the load and prevents it from falling backward when the load is raised. The carriage is moved by this chain, which is operated by a hydraulic lift cylinder. This raises and lowers the carriage. This section of the elevating assembly is called the upright. It's the main part of the lift and contains the mechanisms used to handle a load. The upright you see here is a standard upright. This vertical section of the upright is the mast. It houses the upright channel, which is a track that guides the carriage when it raises and lowers the load. On a forklift, the upright mast can be raised, lowered, and tilted. Tilting forward helps to set a load down or pick up certain items. Tilting the mast back stabilizes a load. The tilt mechanism is also operated by a hydraulic cylinder called the tilt cylinder. Now, to be able to know what you can and can't do with your forklift and where you can and can't take it, you'll need to understand 4 important operating terms: collapsed height, free lift, maximum fork height, and overall extended height. The first 3 you can usually find on the truck manufacturer's ID plate, right on the truck itself. The fourth, overall extended height, can vary, so it may not appear on this plate. Let's go over these 4 working dimensions one at a time. First is the collapsed height. Collapsed height is the distance from the floor or ground to the top of the mast, when the forks are all the way down. By knowing the collapsed height, you can determine your overhead clearance. If the height of a doorway is lower than the collapsed height of your truck, well, that's one of the dangers you'll encounter. Notice that the forks can be raised a certain distance before the collapsed height is passed. This distance is called the free lift. It's important to know what your free lift is because free lift allows the loaded truck to go under any obstacle it can clear when it's empty. When the forks are raised as high as they can go, the distance from the floor to the top of the forks is called the maximum fork height. This is the maximum height to which the truck can be used to stack a load. With the forks all the way up, the distance from the floor to the top of the load backrest is called the overall extended height. If a backrest extension is used with taller loads, the overall extended height will change according to the height of the extension. That's why the overall extended height may not be listed on the manufacturer's ID plate. The other 3, collapsed height, free lift, and maximum fork height, usually are. Now let's take a look and see how these terms apply to different types of uprights. The one we've been talking about is a standard upright. In tight areas, like in a trailer or a boxcar, where the ceiling is just above your truck's mast, you need more free lift room. Otherwise, when you work on a load on the second tier, your mast will hit the ceiling. What you need for this kind of a job is a truck with a free lift upright. A free lift upright increases the amount of free lift to just about 4 feet or 1.3 meters. In a big warehouse where you have to reach a load that is high off the floor, you may need a low collapsed height to clear overhead obstacles. This requires a truck equipped with a 3-stage upright or a 4-stage upright. These uprights have the same collapsed height as standard uprights. However, their masts can be telescoped in either 3 stages or 4 stages instead of just 2. This lets them reach as high as 23 feet, about 7 meters. So far, we've looked at the basic differences between various forklifts, where they are usually used and how they might be powered. We've also seen what kind of tires they use. To help you understand how they operate, we've looked at their lifting mechanisms. And we've defined the operating terms used to describe the working dimensions of the truck. Next, we're going to examine the truck more closely. To do this, we're going to go through the same inspection procedures that you will go through before each shift that the forklift is going to be used. But before we do that, let's take a break. Review section 1 of your workbook and read through your truck's manual. Then look at your truck's elevating assembly and the mechanisms that operate it. In the first session, you were introduced to different types of industrial lift trucks, what makes them different, where they are used, how they are powered, and the tires they use. To explain their operation, we showed you their lift mechanisms and how to determine their working dimensions. Now we're going to take a closer look at a forklift truck. What we're going to do is go through 2 series of checks, the pre-start inspection and the startup safety check. Both of these checks must be performed before each shift that the truck is to be used. This might be 2 or even 3 times a day if the truck is used around the clock. These 2 series of checks are very important. They ensure the safety of both you and your co-workers, and they determine the reliability of the forklift's machinery. These checks are designed to catch any little thing before it becomes a big thing. This reduces downtime and makes sure that the truck is safe for you to operate. The first check is the pre-start inspection. With forklifts powered by internal combustion engines, start by checking the level of the transmission oil. If a check of the dipstick shows that the transmission is low on oil, fill it up to the proper level. Be sure to use only the grade of transmission fluid specified by the truck's manufacturer. You'll find the specs listed in your operator's manual. Then, check the engine oil. It should come up to the full mark on the dipstick. If it's low, add enough motor oil to bring it up to full. Just as before, make sure to use the right kind of oil when you top it off. Next, check the electrolyte in the battery. Be extra careful when you're doing this. Battery acid can burn your skin or your eyes, not to mention what it can do to your clothes. So be careful not to splash any around when checking the battery or when filling it. If you do happen to spill some, wash it away immediately. And no smoking. Battery acid gives off hydrogen gas, which can explode. Then make sure the air cleaner is in good condition. All the air for the truck's engine is filtered through the air cleaner to remove dust, dirt, and other impurities before they get into the motor. Check the filter for blockage and cleanliness. If it's dusty, it can be blown clean with low-pressure compressed air. If it's really fouled, replace the filter element with a new part before operating the truck. Next, check the radiator. The water level should be about an inch from the top. If you detect a sudden drop in the water level, you've probably got a radiator leak. That's a job for the maintenance department. All forklifts have hydraulic systems, so check the oil level and add oil if it's low. Be sure to use only the kind of hydraulic oil called for. Do not use motor oil in the hydraulic system. It'll foul up the system. And remember to fill the fuel tank if necessary. Again, no smoking. The whole time you're checking these things out, keep an eye peeled for leaks. Water, oil, and fuel leaks are all signs of trouble. If you see a leak or any other problem, tell maintenance. Then come the tires. Each tire must be checked for damage from cuts and punctures. If your truck has pneumatic tires, check them for the right air pressure. It's also a good idea to make sure no lugs are missing from the wheels. At least once a week, the lugs should be checked to be sure they've been tightened with a torque wrench to the torque specs in the operator's manual. Next, check the truck safety devices. Most lift trucks have an overhead guard, so be sure it's in place and in safe condition. Test the horn and any other warning alarms your truck might have. Make sure the load back rest is in safe condition and that it's the right size for the job you'll be doing. Use a backrest extension if it's needed. Finally, if there are lights on your truck, test them all. Warning lights, headlights, brake lights, to be sure they all work. Now, if your forklift is powered by an electric motor instead of an internal combustion engine, the pre-start inspection is a little more simple. The big difference is that battery-powered trucks use no engine or transmission oil, no fuel like gasoline, and no radiator or air cleaner. What these trucks do have is a battery and an electric motor for power. So the electrolyte level in the battery is very important. Be sure to follow the same precautions we mentioned earlier, because battery acid is dangerous. If you get any on yourself, wash it off quickly. Many places have washing stations like this for use in emergencies, in case someone gets acid in their eyes or on their clothes or skin. All the other checks for battery-powered forklifts are just like those for internal combustion forklifts. Checkpoints include the hydraulic system, the wheels and tires, the load back rest, and the overhead guard, and all the lights and warning systems. Now, take a few minutes to review these pre-start inspection procedures with your instructor. Your second checkout procedure is the startup safety check. Begin the safety check by making sure the parking brake is on. Before you do anything else, check the hour meter. This keeps track of the hours that the truck has been used. Routine preventive maintenance has to be done at certain times as indicated by the hour meter. These intervals are chosen by the manufacturer and your maintenance people to keep the truck in good operating condition. Before using the truck, be sure that periodic maintenance is not past due. Now check the controls. A forklift powered by an internal combustion engine may use either a clutch or an inching pedal. An inching pedal is like a combined clutch and brake pedal, but it isn't used in their place. It's a sensitive and precise control which lets you creep slowly while you rev the engine to raise a load faster. If you push the pedal all the way in, it acts like a brake and stops the truck. The inching pedal is designed to give you really fine control, and it's a sensitive control. Don't use it as a clutch or in place of the brake. This will wear it out. Whichever your truck uses, start out by making certain that there is nothing binding the pedal. It should move freely. The brake pedal and the gas pedal should also move without sticking. Then work the shift lever through all the gears. It should also move smoothly. Then check the steering for binding and make sure there isn't too much free play. Put the shift lever in neutral and start the engine. As you turn the key to on, you should see the gauge needles move, or on some trucks, the idiot light should come on. If the idiot lights or gauge needles don't function, or if there are other problems, they should be referred to the maintenance department. Now, with the engine running, check to be sure the counter of the hour meter is working. Then check the oil pressure gauge and the fuel gauge to be certain they're working properly. The ammeter should show that the battery is being charged. Periodically check the temperature gauge for any sign of overheating. Finally, check the brakes. First, the parking brake. To do this, pull on the parking brake and then push in the clutch and put the transmission in forward gear. Then let the clutch out gradually. The truck should not creep. Then do the same thing in reverse gear. Release the parking brake, put the truck in gear, and move it a few feet. Stop with a foot brake. Do this in both directions. With an electric forklift, the startup safety check is simpler. First, check the charge in the battery. To do this, make sure the handbrake is on and turn the key to on. Run the forks up and down and tilt the mast back and forth. The needle of the charge meter should stay in the full area. If it falls into empty, there isn't enough charge in the battery to run the truck for a whole shift. Now turn the power off. Check the operation of the brake and accelerator pedals. Make sure the controls move freely without binding. Turn the power on again and test the parking brake and the foot brake as before. When all these procedures are completed, you're ready to roll. Remember that these inspection procedures are not optional. Both the pre-start inspection and the startup safety check have to be done. Trucks like these are expensive, and they can be as dangerous as they are useful. So an important part of your job is to see that your truck will operate properly and safely. Do these checks at the beginning of every shift. Get to know your forklift completely so you'll know what to look for. Use a checklist so nothing gets overlooked. If you do find anything wrong, don't use the truck until it's fixed. A forklift is a complicated machine. Repairs should only be done by experienced and qualified maintenance people. Just as you have to be trained and authorized to operate a forklift, maintenance people must also be properly trained to work on them. If you're not specially trained and authorized to work on your truck, don't fool with it. In this session, you've seen how pre-start inspection and startup safety checks are done and why they're important. Now take a look at the inspection procedures for the truck you'll be using. You'll find these in your workbook. Next, we'll go into preventive maintenance routines that are part of your job too. Any machine that has to do as much work as a forklift truck needs a good maintenance program to keep it running safely and reliably. There are two parts to a good maintenance program. One is the regular scheduled mechanical maintenance, along with proper repairs that are done only by qualified people in the maintenance department. This work must always be done in areas set aside for maintenance, where there are the proper tools and equipment and the right parts. The second half of a good maintenance program consists of things that you, the operator, can do and must do to keep your machine safe and working reliably. This is preventive maintenance. By following the routines you're about to see, you can catch problems early before they become headaches. Now, some preventive maintenance takes place during the daily pre-start and startup checks. But there is more to preventive maintenance. Let's take a look at what you should do. This lift is powered by an internal combustion engine, so the first thing you should do is inspect the exhaust system. If your truck's mufflers are equipped with screens or baffles which can get clogged up, be sure they are clear before you start the engine. If you see any sparks coming from the exhaust, have the truck serviced by the maintenance people right away. Don't try to fix it yourself. Second is the cooling system. It has to be checked every day to make sure the radiator isn't blocked and that there is enough water in the system. But what if your truck needs antifreeze? If your truck is used where it needs antifreeze protection, only ethylene glycol-based antifreeze should be used in the cooling system. This is the same kind of antifreeze used in the cooling system of a car. The next two items, refueling and battery maintenance, need extra precautions against danger. So special areas are set aside for this. The no smoking rule has to be enforced in these areas, and for very good reasons. We've talked about how dangerous battery acid is, and the fact that all three types of fuel used in internal combustion-powered trucks are highly flammable. There can be other dangers, too. For example, suppose your truck is an internal combustion model like this one that runs on LPG, liquid propane gas. Inside this tank is gas that has been compressed into liquid form. When it comes out as a gas. You can't see it. And as it's coming out, it's cold. Very cold. In fact, the LPG that comes out of the tank is cold enough to give you severe frostbite burns if it touches your skin. So to avoid being injured when you're changing propane tanks on your truck, check your operator's manual first for the proper refueling routine. A typical routine for changing propane tanks goes like this. First, close the fuel line valve while the engine is still running. This way, the engine uses up all the gas in the line. When the engine dies, switch off the ignition. Then, disconnect the fuel line. Remove the safety bracket and the hold-down strap. Now you can remove the bottle. When you have a full bottle in place, replace the hold-down strap and the safety bracket and reconnect the fuel line. Now, when you open the fuel line valve, open it slowly. If you open the valve too fast, it can cause a vapor lock that will keep the engine from starting. Another part of your preventive maintenance routine is keeping the truck clean. There's an important reason for this. You can spot things like oil and hydraulic fluid leaks and fuel and water leaks much easier on a clean truck than on a dirty one. Also, the important information on name plates and on lubrication and rating plates can be read much more easily if they're kept clean. In cleaning, use a non-toxic, non-flammable solvent, and be sure the area you're working in is well ventilated. If you have to use a flammable solvent, be sure its specified flash point is higher than 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 39 degrees centigrade. Flash point is the temperature where liquid releases enough vapors to be ignited by a spark. You always have to be ready for the unexpected, so keep a fire extinguisher handy on your truck. Look to see if it has been checked according to the manufacturer's schedule. If anything has to be replaced on your truck, the parts used have to be as good as the original equipment. Modifications to a truck are dangerous unless they are specifically authorized by the truck's manufacturer. Use maintenance and safety checklists during your work. Check off every item to be sure that nothing is overlooked. If you skip an item, chances are it'll come back to haunt you later. Finally, never operate your truck if it needs repair or maintenance work. If you find something wrong with your machine, don't do one last little job with it. At best, you might spill and damage a load. At worst, somebody might get hurt. We'll take a short break now for you to talk about what you've learned so far. Next, we'll talk about the other side of safety, operating the truck itself. At a glance, the controls of a forklift may not seem too different from those of a car. But as you'll soon see, driving a lift truck is quite a bit different. This is because a lift truck is steered through its rear wheels. When you drive your car, you might notice that it's a lot easier to back into a tight parking space than it is to back out of the same space. This is because when you're backing, the front end swings wide when you turn the wheels. Well, this is why the rear wheels are the steering wheels on a forklift. When you maneuver in a tight place, the forks don't swing as much as they would if the steering wheels were at the same end of the truck. This rear-wheeled steering may take a little getting used to. At first, you may feel more comfortable backing your truck since the steering wheels would then be in the lead. This is okay. You'll find that nearly half of your time will be spent operating in reverse. backing loads out of tight places. Or you may be trailing a load which might be so high you won't be able to see to the front. Because rear wheel steering is so different, here are 5 good tips to remember. First, when you're turning a corner, start close to the inside of the turn. This will give enough room for the rear to swing around. However, if you were to start a turn from the middle of an aisle, you'd get hung up at the rear and at the front. Here's tip number 2. When you're turning in to pick up a pallet, do the same thing you do backing a car into a tight parking spot. Start as wide as you can, and you'll have plenty of room for the rear to swing. Again, if you start from the middle, you're too close to the inside of your turn, and you're likely to hang your forks on the middle stringer of the pallet you're trying to load, or catch the far corner of the pallet. Our third tip is, when you're turning around, always back into the turn. There are 3 reasons for this. It gives you clear vision into the turn, it saves extra maneuvering, and you'll be looking forward as you pull out of the turn. The 4th tip concerns going into a boxcar. The dock plate or bridge plate is the plate that goes across the space between the loading dock and the floor of the boxcar. It has to be wide enough to let you go in at an angle. If you were to try going straight in, you'd get hung up on the door frame or the opposite wall of the car. And here's tip number 5. If you have to travel on a ramp or an incline with an unloaded lift, keep the forks tilted back and raised slightly. This will let you clear the bottom angle of the ramp. And always travel with empty forks down grade. This means you'll go backwards up the incline or forward down the incline whenever your lift is unloaded. Always go straight up or straight down the ramp. Never try to turn on a ramp or travel at an angle. If you do, the truck is almost certain to tip over. Keep all your maneuvering on level ground. Now, these 5 tips we've just talked about apply to all powered industrial trucks, but there are other things to keep in mind when using specialty trucks. For example, when you're operating a walkie, the controls are at the end of the handle. This handle also serves as an emergency or dead man brake. If it's dropped or if it's pushed all the way up, it locks the brakes. This is for emergency use only. Don't use it for a normal brake. If you do, you'll wear out the brakes and they may not work when you really need them. Don't forget that no matter how easy walkies may be to maneuver, they are heavy. Be very careful not to pin yourself into a corner or back yourself up against a wall. Now, the things we've just talked about are good basic tips for driving a forklift. Actually, good forklift driving practices are similar to good highway driving practices. Drive defensively, understand good safety procedures and follow them, and use common sense. Always be ready for the unexpected. By following these rules of the road, you can get where you want to go safely. Basically, that's what you're really trying to do on the job. You're getting the job done, and you're getting it done safely. So don't leave defensive driving out in the parking lot when you come to work. Keep it with you. Now, take some time to review these safety pointers. When we come back, we'll be ready to get down to what the forklift is all about, carrying a load. So far, we've covered the basic principles of maneuvering an unloaded lift truck. Now it's time to get into what a forklift is designed to do: lifting, hauling, and depositing loads safely. For starters, let's look at the way a forklift is balanced. When you understand this, you'll understand why certain things done with a forklift have to be done in certain ways. This represents a counterbalance lift truck. If we were to put it on a seesaw or a teeter-totter, you'd see that its point of balance would be toward the rear. Now, when we put a load on the forks, Notice that the balance point shifts somewhat toward the front. If we add more weight, the balance point moves forward even further. If we add too much weight, the truck tilts over, pivoting on its front wheels. Because of this, the front axle is said to be the truck's pivot point. On a straddle truck, the pivot point is at the wheels on the ends of the outriggers. Keep these pivot points in mind. Never pick up a load that is too heavy for your truck to handle. If you do, a load that's too heavy will take the balance point past the pivot point, and your truck will tip forward. How do you know if a load is too heavy for your truck? Well, you can find the truck's capacity on the manufacturer's ID plate right on the vehicle. This is the same plate that gives you its working dimensions. The ID plate shows that this truck's capacity is 4,000 pounds or 1,800 kilograms at a 24-inch or 61 centimeter load center. Now, the term load center is very important when it comes to figuring out how to load your forklift. The load center is just that. It is the distance from the edge of the load to the middle, or 1/2 the length of the load. Since a typical load in most warehouses is 48 inches, 122 centimeters or less in length, a 24 inches or 61 centimeter load center is common for most of these trucks. Now, what happens if the load center of what you want to carry is more than 24 inches or 61 centimeters? Let's say it's 36 inches or 92 centimeters. Since this extra length moves the balance point further forward, you can't carry as much weight. For this truck to lift a load with a 36-inch or 92 centimeter load center, the load can't be more than 3,000 pounds or 1,350 kilograms. There's a big difference between this and the 4,000 pounds or 1,800 kilograms capacity listed for a 24-inch or 61 centimeter load center. You've just seen how improperly loading a forklift can cause it to tip over forward. This is dangerous, of course, but it can be even worse if the truck tips over sideways. To understand how this happens, you have to know a little bit about the way a forklift suspension is designed. Almost every forklift truck you'll use will have a 3-point suspension. This is true even if the truck has 4 wheels. You see, most 4-wheel lifts have a single pivot point at the center of the steering axle. If we connect the 3 suspension points, we get a triangle, a stability triangle. For the truck to be stable, its center of gravity has to fall inside this stability triangle. The center of gravity is a particular point of balance, the point on which you could balance the truck and it wouldn't tip in any direction. What we're actually getting into here is something called weight transfer. Weight transfer occurs when you maneuver a loaded forklift. For example, when you start off, the weight of the load shifts backwards. When you stop, the weight of the load shifts to the front. And when you turn, the weight shifts to the outside of the turn. Now, if you start, stop, or turn too quickly, the weight can shift enough to move the balance point outside the stability triangle. If this happens, it's too late. The truck must tip over. And believe me, if your truck tips over, there's a good chance that you'll be injured. There are a few trucks like the narrow aisle straddle which have a 4-point instead of 3-point suspension. The stability diagram for a 4-point suspension looks like this. Although less likely to tip over sideways, trucks with 4-point suspension have their own peculiar problem. Because the load is carried back between the wheels, trucks like the narrow aisle straddle are more likely to tip over backwards. So be especially careful when backing a narrow aisle straddle out of a storage area with the load raised and the mass tilted back. Now that you know about the stability diagram, balance points, and weight transfer, you should be able to appreciate why it's important to load your forklift properly. If you do that, and if you keep your speed within safe limits and make smooth, gradual starts and stops, you'll have no problems. Now let's watch an experienced operator do some typical lifting and hauling jobs. He'll be using a counterbalanced high lift in this operation. He's already completed his daily inspection and safety check, and he knows that the load he has to handle is within the truck's safe limits. First, he spreads the forks as far apart as practical for the load. He has the mast straight up and down, and the forks at the right height to pick up the load. He drives slowly up to the load until it's all the way back on the forks. To raise the load, he brings it just clear of the floor, about 6 to 8 inches, and tilts the mast back only far enough to stabilize the load. The load is kept low to reduce the effects of weight transfer. Notice that he starts and stops gradually, keeping his speed down, especially around turns. Good maneuvering practices are combined with careful attention to the balance of the truck. Be alert to the feel of your vehicle and its load at all times. You may have to move materials from one floor or level to another. This means you'll have to drive your loaded truck on ramps or in and out of elevators. First, let's see how to handle a load on ramps. You'll need to remember 2 things. 1, when hauling on ramps, always keep the load up grade no matter which way you're heading, up or down. By keeping the load up grade, it will stay tilted back against the load backrest. This is exactly opposite to what you do when driving an unloaded truck. If you were to drive with a load downgrade, the weight transfer might be enough to tip the truck over forward. Always travel straight on ramps. That's our second rule. As we saw earlier, even an unloaded truck can tip over if you try to go up or down a ramp at an angle or try to make a turn on the ramp. If you were to do this with a load on the truck, a tip over would probably be a certainty. If you have to use an elevator with your forklift, first be sure to check the weight capacity. It must hold you, the truck, and the load. Enter the elevator squarely. Once you're on it, lower the forks. Put the shift in neutral. Set the brakes. And shut off the power. If you enter an elevator or any other enclosed space with a walkie, always go in load first. Be sure you can exit safely. Look first to see there are no obstacles or traffic in the way. Then pull out slowly. Now that we've seen how to pick up a load and move it from one place to another, let's talk about depositing a load properly. Like everything you've seen about handling a load, precision is important here too. The first thing to remember is to tilt the mast forward, bringing the load level only when it is directly over the place where it is to be deposited. This holds true whether you're setting a pallet on the floor or stacking loads up high. When stacking loads, there are a couple of precautions to keep in mind. First, don't raise the load until you're ready to stack it. Then, with the mast still tilted back a little, raise the forks just high enough to clear the last tier. Move up to the stack slowly until the load is directly over the place you want to put it. Tilt the mast upright and slowly lower the load in place. Once the forks are free of the load, back out carefully. Avoid bumping the stack or anything else, and be sure to give yourself as much room as possible. When stacking loads, a good rule to remember is that a neat stack is usually a safe stack. That's one way you can tell a good operator. A good operator does neat work, is efficient and smooth, and keeps the truck in good shape. Driving a forklift takes skill and good judgment. Like learning any other skill, you can't get good by taking shortcuts. Practice and good sense is what it takes, along with attention to all safety rules. We've mentioned some safety rules: the daily inspection and safety check, preventive maintenance, and safe handling. There are a lot more of them in your text that apply to special situations. As you study the safety rules, remember that they've been put together by operators who've seen accidents and seen people get hurt from carelessness or bad judgment. Take advantage of their experience and use safe operating techniques. Why learn from your own mistakes when you can learn to do it right the first time?